Betrayal. Lies. Deception. They broke the wrong heart. They ruined the wrong life. But revenge? Revenge is a game of patience. Welcome to Revenge Nexus 2.0, where justice is served cold and payback is inevitable. Subscribe now and witness stories that will leave you breathless. Let's start.
I never imagined my own blood would destroy me. My sister, the person I trusted more than anyone, took everything. My freedom, my dignity, my life. And the worst part? She smiled as she did it. It started with a lie. A well-crafted, vicious lie that turned me from an ordinary girl into a criminal overnight. One moment, I was Emery Hayes, a 26-year-old with a stable job and a simple life in New York. The next, I was handcuffed, dragged through the courthouse, and thrown into a prison cell. My crime? Something so vile, so unforgivable, that the world turned its back on me without hesitation. I didn't kill anyone, I didn't steal, but my sister, Raven, she knew exactly what to accuse me of. Fraud, embezzlement, betrayal of trust, the kind of crime that leaves you with no allies, no sympathy, and no way to clear your name. She forged the documents, planted the evidence, and made sure every piece of the puzzle pointed straight at me. And then she stood in court, her crocodile tears falling as she told the jury how I had ruined her life. I sat there, numb, as the judge's gavel sealed my fate. 10 years. 10 years in a place meant to break me. And Raven? She got everything. My house, my savings, my reputation, the perfect betrayal, executed without a single mistake. But prison didn't destroy me. No, it did something much worse. It transformed me. At first, I was weak. I barely spoke. I let the days blur together, drowning in my own misery. But then something changed. Maybe it was the way the guards sneered at me. Maybe it was the way the inmates tested me, pushing me, waiting for me to break. Or maybe it was the quiet nights when I lay on the cold mattress, replaying every moment of my sister's deception, realizing just how deep her cruelty ran. I stopped crying. I stopped waiting for justice. And I started planning, because I wasn't going to stay in this hell forever. And when I got out, Raven would finally learn what it felt like to lose everything. Prison changes people. Some break, some become hollow, and some, like me, become something else entirely. I stopped being the Emery Hayes who used to laugh easily, who believed in family, who thought love meant something. That girl died the day Raven framed me. The first thing I learned? Weakness is an invitation. My first few months inside were brutal. The fights weren't about survival, they were about establishing who mattered and who didn't. And I was nothing. A privileged girl who had fallen from grace, an easy target for women who had lived in hell long before prison. The first time I got jumped, it wasn't personal. Just a test, a punch to the ribs, a kick to the stomach. Enough to remind me that I was prey. I curled up, tasted blood, and told myself it would be over soon. And it was. But not because they got bored. Because someone stopped them. Her name was Sienna Cross. Tall, lean, and with scars that told stories I'd never understand. She wasn't the kind of person you ignored. She pulled my attacker off me like she was swatting a fly and said, "Just one thing. Not this one." That was it. That was all it took for them to back off. And just like that, I became hers. Not a friend. Not a partner. Just another girl under her protection. I didn't know why she bothered, and I didn't ask. All I knew was that I was breathing because she wanted me to. For weeks, I watched her. How she moved, how she spoke, how she controlled everything without ever raising her voice. She didn't rule with fear. She ruled with power. And power? That was something I needed. "Why did you help me?" I asked one night after the lights went out. She smirked in the dark. "Because you remind me of someone who wasn't supposed to survive this place." "Who? Me?" And just like that, the girl who had been thrown to the wolves started learning how to be one. I trained, I fought, I bled, and every single day I thought about Raven. I thought about her laughing, living my life, spending my money. I thought about the way she cried in court, the way she played the victim so perfectly that even I almost believed her. But the thing about acting, you can't do it forever. She thought she won. She thought I was gone. But I was coming back. And when I did, she wouldn't see me as the sister she once knew. She'd see the monster she created. Time passed, but I stopped counting days. Counting meant hope, and hope was a weakness. Instead, I counted something else. Favors, promises, debts owed. Because in prison, power wasn't about who threw the hardest punch. It was about control. And I was learning fast. Sienna didn't just protect me, she taught me. Not out of kindness, but because she saw something in me. A quiet kind of rage, a hunger. "You want revenge?" she asked one night, her voice low, dangerous. "I want her to suffer," I admitted, my fists clenched. "Then stop thinking like a victim. Think like a hunter." And I did. I studied everything. The way people moved, the way they whispered secrets when they thought no one was listening. I learned that information was a currency more powerful than money, and then one day I heard a name I wasn't supposed to hear. Raven. The sound of it nearly shattered the walls I'd built around myself, but I didn't react. Not yet. A guard. Officer Klein. He was new, arrogant, the kind of man who thought he was untouchable, and he was talking about my sister. "She's making a killing," he muttered to another officer as they passed by. "Hayes' sister? Yeah, she's got her hands in deep with some real money, dirty stuff." I forced myself to keep walking, my heart hammering in my chest. Raven wasn't just living her life, she was thriving. And from what I just overheard, she was into something illegal. Fury burned in my veins, but beneath it, a new feeling twisted its way into my gut. Opportunity. If Raven was dirty, then there was a way to destroy her. I needed more. I needed information, evidence, something I could use. But how? I was locked in here, no access to the outside world, no power. I thought about Sienna, about everything she had taught me, and then I made the first move. That night, I slipped into the dark corner of the yard, where deals were made in whispers and shadows. I found the person I was looking for, Milo Vance. Milo was dangerous, the kind of man who could get things done on the outside even from inside these walls. "I need a favor," I told him, my voice steady. He looked me up and down, unimpressed. "And why the hell would I help you?" I smiled for the first time in a long time. "Because I know something you don't." And just like that, I took my first step toward ripping Raven's perfect life apart. Milo Vance didn't do favors for free. Nobody in prison did. Everything had a price, and I had to make sure what I was offering was worth more than what he'd demand in return. "You're just another inmate," he said, arms crossed, unimpressed. "What could you possibly know that I'd care about?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Raven Hayes, my sister. She's making money in ways that would interest a man like you, money that isn't exactly clean." His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of interest in his eyes. "Go on." I wasn't bluffing. I didn't need to. The guards talked, and I listened. Raven wasn't just spending my stolen money. She was involved in something deeper, something that even the authorities hadn't caught on to yet. I need information on her, I continued, and in exchange, I'll give you what I find. You know people on the outside. I just need one of them to dig into my sister's finances, her business dealings, anything dirty. I'll do the rest. Milo smirked. And what's stopping me from just taking what you told me and cutting you out? I held his gaze. Because you don't know what I know. And if you screw me over, I'll make sure what you do get is just enough to put a target on your back. His smirk widened. You've got balls, I'll give you that. Fine, I'll make some calls. The deal was set. Now, all I had to do was wait. Days passed. I acted normal, played the game, waited for Milo to come through. Then, one night, during dinner, he sat across from me, a slow, satisfied smile on his face. You were right about your sister, he said, spearing a piece of bread with his fork. She's up to her neck in some deep shit. Money laundering, fraud, a few names she probably shouldn't be tied to. Seems like Little Miss Perfect is playing in dangerous waters. My stomach clenched, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. Do you have proof? I will, he said. My guy's still digging, but let me ask you something. What exactly are you planning to do with this? I met his gaze, my voice steady. Burn her world to the ground. Milo chuckled. Cold. I like it. But here's the thing, sweetheart. If you want to take her down, you need to be out there, not in here. And that was the next piece of the puzzle. Getting out. Legally, I had 6 more years to go, but I wasn't planning on waiting that long. I was going to walk out of this prison, and I was going to make Raven regret the day she was born. But first, I needed a way out. Escaping prison wasn't an option, not the kind that involved climbing fences or bribing guards. I needed to get out legally, on paper, clean, no loose ends, because if I ran, I'd be a fugitive, and fugitives didn't get revenge. I needed a loophole, a weakness in the system, and I knew exactly where to start. Sienna. She had been inside for years, long enough to know things about people, about guards, about the justice system itself. If anyone could point me toward a way out, it was her. I found her in the rec yard, arms crossed, watching a group of women argue over cigarettes. She barely glanced at me as I sat beside her. You look like someone with a plan, she murmured, amused. I need a way out, I said bluntly. That got her attention. She turned to me, one brow raised. That's so. And what makes you think I'd help you? I took a breath. There was no room for weakness here. Because you know I'm smart enough to pull it off. And because if you ever need something outside these walls, I'll owe you. She studied me for a long time, then leaned in slightly. You ever heard of compassionate release? I frowned. Like medical release? That only works if someone's dying, she smirked. Or if the right person believes you are. My pulse quickened. Sienna explained it in low, careful words. Some cases got reviewed if an inmate had a severe enough condition, mental instability, terminal illness, something that made keeping them locked up a liability. And sometimes with the right leverage, those cases could be persuaded in a certain direction. It won't be easy, she warned. You need a doctor willing to sign off. You need a file that makes you look just unstable enough to be a problem. And most importantly, you need someone on the outside to push the paperwork through. My mind was already racing. A doctor, a file, someone on the outside. Milo. I didn't trust him, but he wanted Raven's secrets just as much as I did, and he had connections. I found him later that night, leaning against a wall near the kitchen. He glanced up as I approached, smirking. "You're back," he said. "That means you need something." I nodded. "A doctor. One who can make things flexible." He whistled low. "That's a tall order? You planning to fake your way out of here?" "You said it yourself," I replied. "I can't take Raven down from inside these walls." Milo ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Then, finally, he shrugged. "I might know a guy, but if I do this, you owe me, Hayes. And I always collect." I knew what that meant. Favors in prison were never free, but I didn't care, because if this worked, I'd be walking free. And once I was out, Raven's perfect life would start falling apart. Milo didn't waste time. When he said he had a guy, he meant it. Within a week, a prison doctor named Dr. Callum Wright started paying more attention to me, not in an obvious way, but enough that I knew he'd been approached. One afternoon, I was called into medical for a routine evaluation. I sat across from Dr. Wright, keeping my face carefully blank as he flipped through my file. "You've been inside for nearly 4 years," he said, his voice neutral. "No history of mental instability, no medical conditions. So, tell me, Emery, why am I looking at your file?" I didn't flinch. I met his gaze head on. "Because you're going to find something wrong with me." He leaned back, studying me. "And why would I do that?" I tilted my head. "Because I know how this works. Milo doesn't ask for favors lightly, which means you owe him. And now, you owe me." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Smart girl." He closed my file and folded his hands on the desk. "Here's how this works. I diagnose you with something serious, something that makes keeping you locked up a liability, anxiety, PTSD, maybe even dissociation, something that makes the system nervous. That puts you on the track for an early release hearing. But that's only step 1. "What's step 2? I asked. "You need an advocate on the outside, someone who can push for your case to be reviewed, who can make noise about it." I clenched my jaw. I had no family left, no friends, no one who would fight for me. But then it hit me. Raven. She had spent years playing the role of the grieving sister, the one who had lost me to my own mistakes. If I suddenly became a cause, if the media got wind that I was mentally unwell and that the system had been too harsh, she would have no choice but to play along, because if she didn't, it would make her look bad. "I have someone," I said. Dr. Wright arched a brow. That was fast. "She just doesn't know it yet." The next move had to be careful. I couldn't contact Raven directly, not without raising suspicion, but there was a way to manipulate her into coming to me. So I started writing letters. Not to her, to journalists, activists, anyone with a platform that might be interested in a story about a young woman wrongfully convicted and deteriorating behind bars. I wrote about the isolation, the mistreatment, the decline in my mental state. I painted a picture of a woman who was breaking under the weight of injustice. And then I waited. It took 3 weeks. One morning, a guard stopped by my cell, tapping the bars with his baton. "You got a visitor." I already knew who it was before I even walked into the visiting room. Raven. She sat at the table, perfectly put together, wearing an expensive coat, her nails manicured. The sight of her made my blood boil, but I forced myself to look fragile, small. She gave me a long, measured look before leaning forward. "What the hell are you playing at?" she hissed. I blinked, feigning confusion. "I don't know what you mean." "The letters, the media attention. People are asking questions now. Do you know what that means for me?" I tilted my head. "Why would it mean anything for you, Raven?" "Unless you have something to hide," She clenched her jaw, anger flashing in her eyes. I smiled, slow and deliberate. You're going to help me get out of here, and in return, I'll disappear. I won't say a word about you, about anything. She scoffed. And why the hell would I do that? I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper, because if you don't, Raven, I'll make sure you lose everything. For the first time, I saw it. The flicker of fear in her perfect polished eyes, and that was when I knew I had her. Raven had always been a master manipulator, but so was I. The difference? She didn't realize I had become something sharper, something dangerous. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, forcing a laugh. You think you can blackmail me? You're locked in a cage, Emery. You have nothing. I smiled. That's where you're wrong. I have you. Her jaw tightened. She didn't like that. Raven thrived on control, and for the first time she felt it slipping. I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. I know about the money laundering, the fraud. I know who you've been dealing with. I know exactly how much trouble you'd be in if the wrong people found out. Her fingers twitched. It was slight, but I caught it. Bingo. Who's been feeding you lies? She muttered. Does it matter? I tilted my head. What matters is that the media is interested in me now, and if they dig too deep, they might find things you don't want them to. For a split second, panic flickered in her eyes. She masked it fast, but I saw it. I leaned in. You're going to help me get out. You're going to play the role of the caring sister fighting for my release. You're going to say that you forgive me, that you believe I deserve a second chance. And when I'm out, I'll walk away. I won't breathe a word about what I know. She exhaled sharply, looking away. She was running calculations in her head, weighing the risks. I pressed harder. Or I could tell the media everything, right here, right now. Raven's gaze snapped back to mine, pure venom burning behind her eyes. But she didn't argue, because she knew I wasn't bluffing. For the first time, my sister had no way out. Fine, she spat, her voice low. I'll make some calls. But if you screw me over... Oh, Raven, I interrupted, smiling. You already did that to me. She stormed out, and I sat back, heart pounding, adrenaline surging through my veins. It was working. Now I just had to be patient. The next few weeks were a blur. News outlets started covering my case. Wrongfully accused stories popped up online. Experts debated whether my sentencing had been too harsh. And right in the middle of it, Raven, playing the perfect sister. She's not the same person she was before, she told reporters, her voice thick with emotion. I believe she deserves a second chance. It was almost laughable. The public bought it. And the legal system? They listened. A new parole hearing was scheduled. Sienna watched me carefully as I sat on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. So, you really think she's just going to let you walk away? I turned my head toward her, a slow smile forming. Of course not. Because I knew Raven, she wasn't helping me out of kindness. She was doing it to control the situation, to make sure she was the one holding the leash when I got out. But what she didn't realize, I wasn't walking out of prison as her pawn. I was walking out as her executioner. The day of my parole hearing, I sat in that cold, sterile room, hands folded neatly in my lap, pretending to be the woman they wanted me to be. Regretful, broken, redeemable. The board members watched me carefully as one of them, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. Miss Hayes, do you believe you have been rehabilitated? I forced a small nervous smile. I believe prison has changed me, ma'am. I understand my mistakes, and I've worked hard to become someone better. Someone who deserves another chance? Lies. All of it. Beside me, my lawyer, a smug man Raven had hired, nodded in approval. He had coached me on what to say, how to act, and I played my part flawlessly. Then came the final push. Raven sat in the audience, perfectly poised, wearing just the right amount of sadness. She stood when they called on her, hands clasped in front of her like a grieving saint. "Emery has suffered enough," she said, voice thick with emotion. "She's my sister. I lost her once, and I don't want to lose her again. I truly believe she deserves this chance to rebuild her life." I almost laughed. The board whispered among themselves, nodding slightly. My case had become a public spectacle, and the pressure was on them to show compassion. A few moments later, the decision was made. Parole granted. I was free. Raven was waiting for me outside the prison gates, leaning against a sleek black car, like she had won some kind of prize. "You played your part well," she said as I approached. I gave her a slow, knowing smile. "So did you." She opened the car door, gesturing for me to get in. "Let's go. We have a lot to talk about." I hesitated for only a second before sliding in. Not because I trusted her. No, because I knew this was the next step in the game. As the car pulled onto the highway, she studied me, her expression unreadable. "Here's how this works," she said. "You stay quiet. You disappear. I cleared your name, and now you owe me." I turned my head toward her, tilting it slightly. "You think you own me now?" I asked, voice calm. She smirked. "I don't think, Emery. I know." I exhaled slowly, looking out the window. She was wrong. She had no idea that I had already set things in motion, that even as we spoke, the walls around her perfect life were starting to crumble. 'Cause I wasn't planning to disappear, I was planning to destroy her. The car ride was silent for a long time. Raven drove, with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping against her thigh, a habit she had when she was anxious. She thought she had won. She thought I would be grateful, obedient, indebted. She had no idea she had just brought a wolf into her home. Her house, my house, was exactly as I remembered it. The same sleek black gates, the towering glass windows, the driveway that led up to the place she stole from me. "You'll stay here until you figure out your next steps?" she said as we pulled in. I gave her a slow nod. "Generous of you." She forced a smile. "I just want to put the past behind us, Emery." Another lie, but I played along. Inside, everything was pristine. Expensive furniture, spotless floors, the faint scent of lavender drifting through the air. I walked through the living room, my fingers grazing over the back of the couch, over the bookshelves, over the framed photos. She had replaced every single picture of me, like I had never existed. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the emotion down. "Not yet." I turned back to her. "I need a shower." She nodded. "Upstairs, second door on the right. Try not to make a mess." I smiled, slow and sharp. "Wouldn't dream of it." I went upstairs, locked the bathroom door behind me, and pulled out the burner phone I had hidden in my sleeve. Milo had slipped it to me before I left. I dialed the number he had given me. 1 ring, 2, then, "You made it out," Milo's voice drawled. "I did," I murmured, keeping my voice low. "And you have what I need?" Every dirty little secret. Transactions, offshore accounts, connections she really shouldn't have. If this gets out, she won't just lose everything. She'll be running for her life. I exhaled, gripping the phone tighter. "Good. Send it to me." "Patience, sweetheart," Milo chuckled. "You and I still have unfinished business." I clenched my jaw. Of course. He hadn't done this out of kindness. "What do you want?" "Not much. Just a favor. And when the time comes, you'll do it without question." "Got it?" I hesitated. A deal with Milo was dangerous. But this was bigger. "Fine," I said. "Send me everything." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with messages. I opened the first file, and my breath caught in my throat. It was worse than I imagined. Raven wasn't just laundering money. She was connected to something much, much bigger. Dirty politicians, black market deals, bribes that ran deep into law enforcement. And if this information got out, she wouldn't just go to prison, she'd be hunted. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it, the final nail in her coffin. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and walked out of the bathroom. Downstairs, Raven sat at the kitchen table, sipping wine like she didn't have a storm about to swallow her whole. I smiled as I sat across from her. "You always said I was too weak to play your game," I murmured. She glanced up, frowning slightly. "What?" I tilted my head, watching her. "You were wrong. Because by the time I was done, Raven wouldn't just lose everything. She'd beg for it to end." The next morning, I moved with precision. I wasn't reckless. Revenge wasn't about emotion. It was about control. And I had all of it now. Raven sat across from me at breakfast, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone, like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't stolen my life. She didn't know I had already set fire to hers. The files Milo sent me? I had forwarded them. Not to the police. Not yet. That would be too easy, too clean. I sent them to her partners, the ones she had lied to, stolen from, the ones who wouldn't take betrayal lightly. And then I waited. The first call came just before noon. Raven's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and, for the first time, I saw it. Fear. She stood, walking toward the back patio as she answered. "Hey, it's me," she said, voice forced, calm. I watched as she listened. Then, her face changed. The blood drained from her skin. Her grip on the phone tightened. "That's not possible," she whispered. "No one else has access to those records." I smirked. She turned away from me, lowering her voice. "I don't know how this happened, but I'll fix it. Just give me some time." She hung up, exhaling shakily. Then she turned to me. "Did you do something?" I arched a brow. "Why would you think that?" Her jaw clenched. She knew. She just didn't have proof. Not yet. The second call came an hour later. She answered in a rush. "I told you I'm handling it." Silence. Her hands started shaking. "Wait, what do you mean there's more?" She listened, her breathing uneven. Then she turned to me, eyes dark with panic. "You leaked something," she accused. I sipped my coffee. "Did I?" Raven wasn't stupid. She knew how dangerous the people she worked with were. And now? They thought she was a traitor. She grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard. "If you did this, you don't understand what you've started." I smiled. "Oh, I understand perfectly." I pulled my wrist free, standing slowly. "This is just the beginning, Raven," I whispered. "You took everything from me. You built your kingdom on my destruction. And now?" I leaned in, my voice calm, almost gentle. "Now I get to watch you lose everything." Raven's breath hitched. For the first time, she saw it. The truth. I wasn't her victim anymore. I was the reckoning she never saw coming. And as her phone rang again, another call, another threat, another piece of her empire crumbling, she realized it too. I turned, walking out of the kitchen, my heart steady, my steps slow, because I wasn't running anymore. I was in control. And Raven? She was next.